There's a bloodline that runs through history like a scarlet thread, connecting dozens of families across centuries, across continents, across cultures. A bloodline marked by tragedy, madness, and an inexplicable pattern of women who see too much, and men who turn their backs on what they love most. Genealogists call it the MEDUSA line, and if you trace it back far enough, it all leads to one moment, one crime, one curse that has never been lifted. What if I told you that when Perseus killed Medusa, he didn't just end a monster's life? He started something far worse, a generational curse that has been silently destroying families for over 3,000 years. And the most terrifying part? It might still be active today. Let me start with a story from 1987. A small village in Greece, population barely 300. A young woman named Eleni woke up one morning to find that her hair had turned white overnight. Not gray. Pure white. Like snow. Like marble. Like stone. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strange part was that every mirror in her house had cracked. 7 mirrors, shattered from the inside out, as if something had been trying to escape. Her family thought it was stress. Maybe a medical condition. They took her to doctors in Athens. The doctors ran tests. Everything came back normal. Except Eleni kept insisting she could see things. Things that hadn't happened yet. Things that were going to happen to people she looked at. Her mother dismissed it as delusion. Her father said she needed rest. But then her grandmother, ancient and weathered, took one look at Eleni and went pale. She pulled out an old family Bible, the kind that records births and deaths going back centuries. And she showed Eleni something that made the young woman's blood run cold. Every 7 generations in their family, a daughter was born who went mad, who claimed to see the future, who refused to look at people directly, who eventually isolated herself completely. And in the margins of the Bible, in faded ink, someone had written a single word next to each of these women's names. Gorgon. That's when I started investigating, because Eleni's family wasn't unique. As I dug deeper into genealogical records, cross-referencing historical documents, following bloodlines across Europe and into the Middle East, I found something impossible. There are dozens of families, seemingly unconnected, that share this pattern. Women born every few generations who develop the same symptoms: white hair, prophetic visions, an inability to look people in the eyes, a tendency to isolate, and most eerily, a disproportionate number of people around them suffering sudden paralysis, strokes, or what old records called being struck stone still. The pattern goes back, way back, past the Renaissance, past the Roman Empire, past classical Greece, all the way back to one source point, the island where Medusa died. Now you might be thinking this is coincidence, pattern recognition, gone wild. But here's what convinced me otherwise. In 2003, a genetics research team studying hereditary disorders in Mediterranean populations found something they couldn't explain. A specific genetic marker that appears almost exclusively in families that can trace their lineage back to ancient Greece. This marker is associated with heightened sensitivity in the visual cortex, unusual activity in the parts of the brain responsible for processing faces and social cues, and a rare neurological condition that causes involuntary avoidance of direct eye contact. The researchers published their findings in an obscure medical journal. They called it the Perseus syndrome, but they had no idea why they chose that name. They just said it felt right. Let me take you back to where this all started, to the moment Medusa died. You know the story. Perseus, guided by the gods, comes to her island. He uses Athena's polished shield as a mirror, approaches while Medusa sleeps, and cuts off her head. One clean stroke. The monster is dead. The hero is victorious. But here's what the myths don't tell you. Medusa was pregnant. Not by Poseidon, as some later stories claim. That was a fabrication, a way to explain away what happened next. Medusa was pregnant because she wasn't always alone on that island. Before she became the creature we know, before the full transformation took hold, there were years when she was still partly human. Years when sailors would occasionally land on her shores. Years when she was desperately lonely. One of those sailors stayed. His name is lost to history, but he stayed for almost a year. He loved her, or he said he did. He claimed he could see past the serpents, past the curse, to the woman beneath. They had a child, a daughter, and then, like all the others, he looked into Medusa's eyes. Accident or intention, we'll never know, but he turned to stone. And Medusa was left alone again, but this time with a baby girl. She named her daughter Chthoniya, which means of the earth, and she raised her in secret, in the caves beneath her island, where the child would never have to see her mother's face, where Medusa could be a mother without being a monster. But Chthoniya inherited something from her mother. Not the full curse, not the serpent hair or the petrifying gaze, but something subtler, an echo, a shadow of the power. She could sense when people were lying. She could feel malicious intent before it manifested. She could look at someone and know, just know, when they were going to betray her. It wasn't petrification, it was revelation. The truth made visible, and people hated her for it. Because nobody wants their secrets exposed. Nobody wants someone who can see through their masks. So Chthoniya learned to hide her gift. She learned to look away, to pretend she didn't see, to let people keep their comfortable lies. When Perseus killed Medusa, Chthoniya was hiding in the caves. She was 7 years old. She heard her mother's scream. She felt something break in the world, like a cord being cut, like a spell shattering into 1,000 pieces. And she ran. She climbed up from the caves to find Perseus standing over her mother's decapitated body, holding the head, the snake still writhing, the eyes still glowing with that terrible power. Perseus saw the child. For a moment, they stared at each other. Him, the hero, covered in Medusa's blood. Her, the daughter, orphaned by his blade. Perseus made a choice in that moment. He let her go. He didn't kill her. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe he just didn't want to murder a child. But he should have, because Chthoniya didn't just run. She cursed him. With her dying mother's blood still warm on the stones, with her grief raw and howling, Chthoniya spoke words that would echo through millennia. She cursed Perseus's line. She cursed every hero who would come after him. She cursed anyone who would take pride in killing what they didn't understand. But most of all, she cursed her own blood. She cursed the daughters of Medusa to carry forward the echo of her mother's power, generation after generation, ensuring that the world would never forget what had been done, that the gift of sight, of truth, of revelation, would pass down through the women of her line forever. Chthoniya survived. She made her way to the mainland, was taken in by a family in Corinth who didn't know who she was or where she came from. She grew up, had children of her own, and taught her daughters one crucial lesson. Never look people directly in the eyes. Always glance away. Always keep your gift hidden, because the world will destroy you if it knows what you can see. And so the bloodline began. The first generation born from Medusa's last living daughter. And with it, the curse began to spread. Not evenly, not predictably, but following a pattern that geneticists today still can't fully explain. Every few generations, one daughter would inherit the full echo, the sight, the sensitivity, the ability to see truth, and the inability to look away from it. These women were called different things in different times. Oracles, seers, witches, madwomen. They were revered and feared, sought after and persecuted, depending on the era and the culture. But they all shared the same core experience. They could see what others couldn't, and it isolated them completely. Now let's jump forward about 400 years from Medusa's death, to a woman named Cassandra. No, not that Cassandra. Different person, same name, same curse. This Cassandra lived in Alexandria during the height of the Ptolemaic kingdom. She was a scholar, a mathematician, one of the few women allowed into the great library, and she had a gift. She could look at a person and see the geometry of their fate, the mathematical probability of their choices playing out. She tried to warn people. The scholar who was going to publish stolen work, the merchant who was planning to betray his partners, the politician who was secretly plotting against the queen. But nobody believed her. Or worse, they believed her and hated her for it. Because she was right. Every single time. Her warnings came true with disturbing accuracy. And people started to fear her. They called her the stone-eyed woman, because people said that meeting her gaze was like being frozen in judgment. Eventually, she was accused of witchcraft. She was going to be executed. But the night before her execution, she wrote a letter that survived, that was preserved in the Library of Alexandria's records, and that was rediscovered in the 20th century among the Oxyrhynchus papyri. In that letter, she traced her lineage back through her mother's line, generation by generation, all the way to a woman named Chthoniya. She wrote about the curse, about the gift of sight that was also a burden, about how every few generations a daughter would be born with the full weight of it. And she wrote something that sent chills down my spine when I first read it. She wrote that the curse wasn't just about seeing the truth. It was about being unable to be seen truly in return. Everyone who looked at the women in her line saw only what they projected. Monster, witch, madwoman, threat. Nobody could see them as they actually were. It was a different kind of petrification. Not turning others to stone, but being turned to stone in others' eyes, frozen in their perception, unable to be known. That letter was dismissed as the ravings of a condemned woman, but it survived. And it's not the only piece of evidence. Throughout history, we find records of women in Medusa's bloodline. Not always labeled as such, but the pattern is there once you know how to look for it. There was Theodora in Byzantine Constantinople, who claimed she could see guilt on people's faces like a physical mark. There was Adelita in medieval Spain, who was burned as a witch because she accurately predicted which members of her village were planning to betray their neighbors to the Inquisition. There was Margaret in colonial Massachusetts, who wasn't one of the Salem witch trial victims, but who should have been, given that she had the same gift and the same curse. Seizing each of these women, when their stories are examined, claimed descent from an ancient Greek bloodline. Each of them had the white hair, the aversion to direct eye contact, the prophetic sight, and each of them ended badly. Execution, exile, madness, suicide. The curse ensured that the gift of truth would also be the gift of suffering. But here's where it gets even stranger. The curse didn't just affect the women. It affected the men in the bloodline too. The sons of Medusa's line didn't get the sight. They got something else. An inability to truly see the women they loved. A psychological blindness that made them turn away at crucial moments, made them betray or abandon or fail to protect the women in their lives. It's like the curse of Perseus was reversed. Instead of being the hero who slays the monster, the men in the bloodline became the ones who couldn't face what they needed to face. There's a documented case from Renaissance Italy. A man named Lorenzo, a merchant, married to a woman named Julia who had the sight. Julia tried to tell him that his business partner was embezzling from him, that his friend was sleeping with his sister, that his own brother was plotting to steal his inheritance. She could see it all. But Lorenzo couldn't hear it. Every time she tried to tell him the truth, something in him shut down. He would get angry. He would accuse her of paranoia. he would leave the room. And when everything she predicted came true, when his life fell apart exactly as she'd warned, he still couldn't acknowledge that she'd been right. He blamed her, called her a witch, said she must have caused it with her evil eye. He had her committed to an asylum. She died there, alone, still trying to make him see. That pattern repeats throughout the bloodline. Men who love these women but can't truly see them, who turn away when faced with their truth, who abandon them when they need protection most. It's like the curse knew that isolation was the cruelest punishment. These women could see everything, but nobody could see them. They could speak truth, but nobody could hear them. They were visible but invisible, present but absent, alive but dead to the world around them. And it continues through generations, an echo getting neither weaker nor stronger, just persistent, relentless, eternal. By the 18th century, the bloodline had spread across Europe and into the New World. It had mixed with other lineages, diluted in some branches, concentrated in others. But the core pattern remained. One woman in each affected family, born every few generations, carrying the full weight of Medusa's echo. There's a genealogical society, a very private one, that has been tracking these bloodlines for over 200 years. They don't advertise their existence. They don't publish their findings. But they keep meticulous records. Birth records, death records, medical histories, personal testimonies. They've documented over 300 women who fit the pattern. 300 women across 1,000 generations who have carried the curse. And they've found something else. Something that should be impossible. The women in the bloodline, the ones with the full echo of Medusa's power, they don't age normally. Or rather, they age in spurts. They'll look 25 for 15 years, then suddenly look 40 overnight, then stay that way for another decade. It's like their bodies are partially removed from normal time, like the petrification that was Medusa's curse manifests in them as a kind of temporal stasis. They're not immortal. They die, but they experience time differently. And there's more. The Genealogical Society has documented cases where these women seem to share dreams. Women who have never met, who live on different continents, who don't even know they're related, report having the same nightmare. They're in a cave. There are serpents. There's a man with a sword. And there's a woman with a baby, trying to hide, trying to protect, trying to survive. It's Medusa's last moments, replaying in the collective unconscious of her bloodline. A trauma so deep that it's encoded in their very DNA, passed down not just genetically, but psychically, emotionally, spiritually. Now let's come back to the present day. To Eleni, the Greek woman I mentioned at the beginning. After her grandmother showed her the family Bible, after she learned about the pattern in her bloodline, Eleni started researching. She found the Genealogical Society. She connected with other women around the world who had similar experiences. And together, they started to understand something that their ancestors never could. The curse wasn't just a punishment. It was a warning. Medusa's curse, passed down through generations, was meant to ensure that the world never forgot what happens when you turn victims into monsters, when you punish people for the crimes committed against them, when you silence those who see uncomfortable truths. Every woman in the bloodline, with her gift of sight and her burden of isolation, was a living reminder of Medusa's story, a walking memorial to a woman who was victimized, transformed, vilified, and murdered. But here's the thing about curses. They can be broken. Not easily, not cheaply, but they can be broken. The key is understanding what the curse really is. And the curse, it turns out, isn't really about the women at all. It's about everyone else. The curse is that the world refuses to see these women clearly, refuses to believe them, refuses to protect them. The curse is in the eyes of the beholders, not in the eyes that do the beholding. So how do you break a curse like that? How do you change the way the entire world sees a bloodline that's been cursed for 3,000 years? Eleni and the other women decided to do something radical. They went public. In 2019, they published a book, a compilation of testimonies from 47 women across 23 countries, all members of Medusa's bloodline, all carriers of the curse. They called it the Stone-Eyed Daughters. They told their stories, the sight, the isolation, the disbelief, the persecution, the pattern that had repeated for millennia, and something unexpected happened. People believed them. Not everyone, of course. There were skeptics, debunkers, people who said it was all coincidence and confirmation bias. But enough people believed. Enough people recognized something in those stories. The experience of seeing truth and being dismissed. The experience of warning people and being ignored. The experience of being right and being hated for it. Women especially recognized it, because even if they weren't part of Medusa's bloodline, they knew what it felt like to see clearly and be told they were seeing things, to speak truth and be called hysterical, to have their perception questioned, their reality denied, their experience invalidated. Medusa's curse wasn't unique to her bloodline. It was a concentrated, extreme version of something much more universal. The curse of being a woman who sees too much in a world that doesn't want to look. And once people understood that, once that connection was made, something began to shift. The curse began to loosen, not break entirely, but loosen. Cracks appeared in it. Because curses, real curses, the kind that echo through generations, they're sustained by collective belief, by shared refusal to see, by cultural patterns of dismissal and denial. And when those patterns start to change, when people start to actually listen, to actually see, the curse loses power. Eleni's hair didn't turn back to its original color. The prophetic sight didn't go away. But the isolation began to ease. She found community, support, people who believed her, people who valued her gift instead of fearing it. And across the world, other women in the bloodline reported similar experiences. The curse was still there, but it wasn't as crushing. The weight was distributed now, shared among people who understood, who witnessed, who refused to turn away. But here's the complicated part. Not everyone wants the curse to be broken, because Medusa's curse serves a purpose in our culture. It's a warning. It's a cautionary tale. It says, this is what happens to women who are too powerful, too perceptive, too unwilling to look away from uncomfortable truths. The story of Medusa, the monster who must be slain by the hero, justifies 1,000 small cruelties. Every time a woman is told she's seeing things that aren't there, every time a survivor is questioned instead of believed, every time someone with prophetic insight is dismissed as hysterical or delusional, the curse of Medusa legitimizes it all. So there are people, institutions, power structures that benefit from keeping the curse active, from keeping the women of Medusa's bloodline isolated and dismissed, from maintaining the pattern. And they push back hard. Some of the women who contributed to the Stone-Eyed Daughters faced harassment, doxing, threats, attempts to discredit them. Some lost their jobs. Some lost custody of their children. The curse, it turns out, has defenders. People invested in keeping it alive, dismissing. But curses, once acknowledged, once brought into the light, start to lose their power regardless, because the deepest curses work in shadow. They work through silence and forgetting and denial. The moment you name them, the moment you trace their lineage and expose their mechanisms, they begin to unravel, not quickly, not completely, but inevitably. Medusa's curse has been echoing through 1,000 generations. But we're living in the generation that's learning to echo back, to talk about it, to study it, to recognize it, to refuse to let it continue in silence. And that refusal, that collective decision to witness and validate and believe, is more powerful than any ancient magic. There's a woman in the bloodline, living in California now, who has started teaching other women how to use the sight. Not as a burden, but as a gift. She calls her workshops stone-eyed training. Women how to trust their perceptions, how to speak uncomfortable truths, how to maintain their power even when the world tries to make them doubt themselves. She teaches them that the curse of seeing clearly is only a curse in a world that's invested in illusion. In a world that's ready for truth, it's a superpower. And she's not alone. Across the world, women in Medusa's bloodline are reclaiming the curse, reframing it, transforming it from a burden into a legacy. They're connecting with each other, building networks, creating support systems that their ancestors never had. They're writing the stories that were never allowed to be told. They're making art that forces people to look at what they'd rather ignore. They're becoming oracles again, but this time with agency. This time with community. This time with power that isn't just the power to petrify, but the power to transform. And the men in the bloodline are changing too. The sons and brothers and fathers who inherited the curse of blindness, the inability to truly see the women they love. Some of them are learning to listen, learning to believe, learning to face what they've been conditioned to turn away from. It's slow, it's difficult, it's painful, but it's happening. Because the curse that echoed through 1,000 generations only echoes as long as we keep repeating the same patterns. The moment we change the pattern, the echo changes too. It doesn't disappear. Echoes don't work that way. But it transforms from a curse to a call, from a warning to a promise, from the scream of a dying mother to the voice of her living daughters saying, "We see, we remember, we refuse to turn to stone." So what about you? You, listening to this story. You're part of this too, because the curse of Medusa isn't contained in a bloodline. It's cultural, it's collective. It's in every moment when someone sees truth and is dismissed. In every moment when someone speaks up and is silenced. In every moment when someone's perception is questioned because it's inconvenient to acknowledge. You've felt it, maybe not as intensely as the women in Medusa's direct bloodline, but you've felt it. That moment when you knew something was wrong, but nobody else seemed to see it. That moment when you spoke up and were told you were overreacting. That moment when your reality was denied and you started to doubt yourself. That's the echo. That's the curse. And you have a choice. You can perpetuate it. Turn away when someone speaks uncomfortable truth. Dismiss perceptions that challenge your worldview. Demand that people silence their sight to make you comfortable. Or you can break it. You can listen. You can believe. You can witness. You can refuse to turn away. You can be the generation that changes the echo. The curse that echoed through 1,000 generations is reaching its end. Not because it's fading naturally, not because time has weakened it, but because we're learning, finally, after 3 millennia, to face what Medusa faced, to see what she saw, to acknowledge what she tried to show us. That the real monsters aren't the ones with serpent hair and petrifying gazes. The real monsters are the ones who refuse to see, who turn away from truth, who transform victims into villains to maintain comfortable lies. Medusa's curse was never about her power to petrify. It was about our refusal to look, our insistence on seeing her as a monster instead of as a woman who was violated, transformed, isolated, and murdered. And that curse, that refusal, has echoed through every generation since, in every Cassandra who was called crazy, in every oracle who was called witch, in every woman who saw clearly and was punished for it. The echo is ending now, not because the bloodline is ending. The bloodline continues, There are daughters being born right now who carry Medusa's gift, who will grow up to see what others can't see, who will struggle with isolation and disbelief. But the world they're being born into is different. Not better, necessarily. Not fixed. But different. Because enough of us are learning to listen, to see, to believe, to witness without turning away. The curse that echoed through 1,000 generations is being answered. Finally. With acknowledgement, with validation, with justice delayed, but not denied. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to transform the echo into something new. Not a curse, not a warning, but a legacy. The legacy of women who saw truth, even when it cost them everything. Who spoke up, even when it isolated them completely. Who refused to look away, even when the world demanded their blindness. That's Medusa's real story. Not the monster with the petrifying gaze, but the mother with the crying daughter. The victim with the prophetic descendants. The curse that became a calling. The echo that became a voice. And the 1,000 generations of women who carried that voice forward through darkness and denial. Until finally, someone was ready to listen. We're that someone. Right now. This moment. This generation. The curse ends with us. The echo transforms with us. The story changes with us. Because we're learning, at last, to look Medusa directly in the eyes, to see her clearly, to acknowledge what was done to her, and to honor the 1,000 generations of her daughters who carried the weight of that crime forward, turning curse into wisdom, isolation into insight, and petrification into power. The curse that echoed through 1,000 generations is still echoing. But listen carefully. The echo is changing. It's not a scream anymore. It's a song. And if you're brave enough to truly listen, you might just hear what it's been trying to tell us all along. That the power to see clearly is never a curse. The curse is living in a world that demands your blindness. And that curse, finally, is breaking.